A few years ago, I made a video detailing every fighter's best and worst stages in Rivals 2 to help players know what kind of bans and counterpicks they should aim for in a rank set or when playing in a local or online bracket. However, the meta's changed a lot since then, with dozens of balance patches, 6 new fighters, and character and player preferences naturally evolving and changing over time. These past few weeks, I've polled you guys, the Rivals 2 community, asking each player their main's best and worst stage. Thanks to all your responses, I've been able to calculate who's good, where, from a community standpoint. Obviously, individual players also have their preferences, so this guide won't be 100% foolproof, but it should give you a good starting point on where you're sure stages will be good to ban or to pick. Before we get into each fighter's best and worst stage, I want to really quickly go over the form that I gave players so that we're all on the same page for the video. First, I asked for player rank, with over 80% of our responders being gold or higher, and around 55% being plat or higher, meaning that I think the data that we'll be pulling from today will be workable with, since around gold is where I imagine you start to get the game sense for good or bad stages. Next, I asked players who they mained, which is obviously a key part to this video. If a character didn't get a lot of responses, I would reach out to top or high level reps of that fighter that I knew just to double check the data to make sure I'm minimizing my risk of spreading too much misinfo. Following that up, I asked players what their main's good and bad stages were, letting people tell me they did or didn't want to go to a certain stage. From the raw data pulling all the characters' sources together, we can see that players love Rockwall, Godai, Julesville, and Hodojo, with players not being a big fan of Hyperborean Harbor, Fire Capital, and Tempest Peak. However, to a lesser degree than how many players loved the previously mentioned stages. For a quick follow-up to refine the data, I also asked players for the best starter and counterpick for their character. I think this is important so I can highlight stages that you might want to avoid against them or be sure to ban first. But truthfully, sometimes with different opinions from the community based on polling, the numbers can get a little bit muddy. So, to make sure that I'm representing the player base correctly, I'll be averaging out player responses. For example, if 5 Arcane mains filled out the survey and 3 said that Godai was his best starter, for example, and 2 picked another stage but still marked Godai as being a good stage, then I'd tell you that Godai is his best starter. Or if it's an even split, maybe we'll have 2 best starters. Finally, for the last question, I also asked players to give me a quick write-up about the stages they chose and why. This will help me explain to each of you what each stage means for a character, since truthfully I'm a pretty mid Arcane main. I don't really know a lot about Galen's stages, so this question is going to be where I'm getting my talking points from. Speaking of polls and community feedback like this, I'm working on another tier list video since I think this patch will probably be our primary one played for EVO. I've linked a poll down in the description that you can fill out the ranking of each fighter to have your input considered for that upcoming video. I've rambled long enough though, let's go ahead and dive into the video and see what's up, starting with Forestburn. Forestburn's good stages are pretty agreed upon by his player base, with Godai Delta, Hodojo, Julesville, and Merchantport all being great standouts for him, with Hyperborean Harbor being the only really rough stage that players agreed on for him to not be super fun, since his recovery needs to touch the wall a lot of the time, and non-traditional walls that are located on Harbor mean that you're overly reliant on smoke. Forestburn has less bad stages than an average character since his game plan is pretty flexible, with him being able to play a little more scrappy with his sword and dagger, or at a distance forcing opponents to approach him, meaning that he's able to flex stages based on his opponent's wants and do pretty okay more or less anywhere. His best starter was unanimously agreed to be Godai Delta, with players voting to not identify necessarily a best counterpick, since as noted they really depend on your matchup. Since, for example, Merchantport is great into a more rushdown fighter, since you still get plat extensions for tech chase kill confirms, but you might not want to take a campier fighter there since the stage size might give them more of a benefit into you. Next, let's go ahead and take a peek at Loxodon. Loxodon had a lot of responses, with Lox mains loving Godai Delta, Fire Capital, Rockwall, and Tempest Peak, with them not loving Merchantport and Harbor. Notably, I had half the Lox mains marked that they love Ethereum Forest, and half of them marked that they weren't a fan of the stage. So since the vote is split, I'm gonna mark it as a neutral map here on our graphic. I'd imagine that this is due to the player base of Loxodon either preferring to play him in a more campy, more passive playstyle, compared to a more aggressive playstyle that higher level Lockstomps tend to have, meaning that the higher level Lockstomps who choose to engage more might like the smaller map compared to players who might not engage quite as often. If you're fighting a Lockstomp player, I would consider this playstyle when picking starters. Godai was more or less unanimous as Lockstomp's best starter overall, with his best counter pick being a little bit more contested, with Tempest Peak and Fire Capital tying and winning out in the end. You can kind of choose between these two based on which matchup you're going into and your opponent's playstyle. Claren's up next in our dataset with a good amount of responses, positioning her to be one of the more rounded, versatile characters when it comes to stage picking and banning, since her excellent run speed can allow her to close gaps on large stages that slower characters might suffer on, but her lack of a projectile or zoning tool to slow the tempo of a game means that small stages by default feel incredible to her. Her overall game plan of cornering opponents and getting early kills at ledge or offstage with maybe a tip or neutral special is especially strong on the smaller starters, meaning that Claren doesn't really have a single bad starter. But Etherean Forest was clearly voted to be her best starter and best stage overall. When it comes to counter picks, Fire Capital and Merchant Port were marked as being a little rough, however, especially into characters who benefit from them more by being able to take advantage of the extra space those stages provide. But as I noted, while Claren doesn't explicitly benefit from the extra space or want to play on these stages generally, she's not as bad as other fighters who have a lot worse movement speed or don't have moves to wall out opponents. Overall, banning stages against Claren is one of the trickier fighters to solve, so don't be scared to ban stages that you think you'd be uncomfortable on in the matchup instead of banning to her needs and wants, since with only 2 bans you might not be able to ban all of her needs and wants. Zetterburn is our final firefighter, and he's a little similar to Claren in the sense that his stage list is pretty flexible. He's one of our most repped characters here in our dataset, but players couldn't fully agree on specific best stages. Overall, the Lion loves a small stage where he can scrap and easily close gaps on his opponent, making most of the starters really solid for him, with Godai Delta for its low ceiling and Julesville being solid standouts among the group as standard with other brawly characters. However, the small side blast zones of Etherean Forest are super sick for his early kill confirms off the side with moves like forward air, forward throw, and F tilt at ledge, maybe even a burning F strong if you're freaky. Speaking of freaky, let's talk about Zetterburn's counter picks. Rockwall is awesome for similar reasons to Etherean Forest with the small side blast zones. But Hyperborean Harbor is also incredible for the Lion since the small top blast zones allow for Zetter's incredible up strong to kill all the more early. In the past, Zetter really struggled on Air Armada due to its weird walls, but since that's not in the legal stage set anymore, the only stage he doesn't super love are Tempest Peak and Fire Capital, with those only being marginally bad for him due to the plat layout being tricky for him to push a full advantage on or due to the stage length. Before we move on to our air fighters, I want to remind you really quickly to use code LASTTALK in the Rivals 2 item shop to support my channel. Using it and subscribing to the channel helps me out so much to make content just like this and host free weekly events on my Discord. Thanks tons, and let's go ahead and take a peek at Raster stages. Raster is a unique fighter at the roster, since so many of his kill confirms place opponents in the air before knocking them into the side blast zone for kills. This means that Raster really benefits offensively from smaller, more brawly stages similarly to Zetterburn and Claren, to take stocks even earlier than he normally would. On the flip, however, since Raster's commonly killing people offstage and placing them in uncomfy recovery spots, it's not so terrible to take a fighter to a stage that they might just feel uncomfy in, just to force these situations all the more often. With that being said, Raster players noted that they liked Hodojo a lot as a starter for its consistency, since Raster gets huge platform combos and can reset his landing on the top platform to kill off the top or side with the jump strong attack. Julesville was also voted pretty favorably for the bird, since the moving platform allows for Raster to extend himself a little further off stage to explode opponents at incredibly early percents. For counterpicks, Raster players commonly voted for Rockwall as being Raster's best. However, Merchant Port and Fire Capital were also brought up due to Raster being one of the few characters that can actually get full value from their higher platforms in a combo. The only bad stage that players were able to agree upon was Metal Refinery, but a few noted that the stage doesn't feel necessarily awful bad, just that the layout isn't as beneficial to the bird as other starters, and that bad stages for Raster are very matchup dependent. Overall, when banning and picking stages as or against Raster, I would consider what stages are easiest to escape as platform extensions on your character specifically, and what stages might allow you to push your advantage the hardest, since his lightweight means that he dies super early, so taking advantage of that can go a long way for you. I want to talk about Fleet next. She's kind of similar to Raster in the idea that a lot of her early kill confirms involve trolling off stage, meaning that a lot of the stages Raster enjoys, she does too. Ethereal Forest is really great for this, since its small side blast zones allow her Nair combos to become much more threatening and kill opponents holding down and out, trying to escape much earlier, preventing the move's most common counterplay. Julesville is also phenomenal for her, similar reasons to Raster, but also the moving platform means that Fleet's passive game plan becomes a little bit more diverse too, since she can either stand on the platform and shield drop an opponent with one of these incredibly strong aerials while the platform moves around the stage, or safely use her side B from under the moving platform, since fast characters won't be able to jump over and hit her for it quite as easy as whenever she's not under a platform. Tempest Peak was pretty much agreed upon as her best counterpick for similar reasons. As far as stages that Fleet doesn't love, Hodojo and Metal Refinery can be a little rough, since Fleet doesn't necessarily get a ton of extensions from the platform being there, but her opponents probably will. Merchant Port and Fire Capital can also be a little tricky for Fleet in some matchups, since they're so big and she's not super fast. Obviously, she could resort to playing more passive on these if she wants, but unlike Julesville, the lack of a moving platform means she's not able to reposition quite as flexibly, and has to play a lot more strictly, allowing for higher level players to pick apart her camping, and punish her really hard for it, or just simply reverse camp her back. Absa floats into our list next as being one of our more unique fighters in the roster. Her combo of zoning tools, traps, and Pervasive Vantage State make her really flexible on where she wants to go and how she can get reward from a stage pick. But because of that, Absa's playstyle might skew which stages you value a lot. Ethereal Forest and Julesville are both great starters for her since she has the ability to kill with Lightning Kick really early off the side. Their smaller stage lengths also prevent faster opponents from holding away from her traps, and force more checkmate scenarios pretty well with Cloud, since Cloud covers maybe an eighth of the stage on a stage like Ethereal Forest, but only maybe a 16th-ish of a stage on Fire Capital. Hodojo is also a 6 starter for Absa with so many platforms to reset her movement off of, and find incredibly strong combo extensions. For counterpicks, Merchant Port and Harbor are incredibly good for her. Absa is able to take advantage of the weird plat layouts that a lot of fighters kinda struggle with her big up air, up B resets, and neutral air drag downs. They're also a little bit larger than a standard stage, so in matchups where you want to take a little bit more breathing room as Absa, it's never really a bad idea to pick one of these. As far as bad stages for the GOAT go, Goat Delta can be a little tricky due to Absa's floaty weight, meaning she dies off the top earlier than a standard champion, and not having the room to breathe that Harbor, a smaller ceiling height stage, provides, meaning that it's easier to catch Absa on a stage like Godai and then get that kill confirmed. Fire Capital and Rockwall can also be kinda tough, since Absa doesn't necessarily get as much of a benefit on these stages as a few other fighters in the cast, and some characters that prefer to play more passively can kinda just stand under the side platforms of those stages and force Absa to approach in a more predictable way, due to her slow speeds and preferring to have a full set of movement options when landing on an opponent with an aerial. Rolling into the Earth Fighters, let's start with Lorena. Lorena loves stages where she can pull opponents off stage and force them to play a choose your own adventure game with her up air. If you choose to hold in, you get clapped by a forward air, and if you hold out, well, you just die. This leads to Lorena loving Ethereal Forest as far as a primary starter pick goes, but she doesn't necessarily have a bad starter stage pick either. None of them are really notably long or allow Lorena to get camped in any kind of severe way, giving her freedom to pick the starter based on the matchup and based on how she wants to use chair and what confirm she's looking for. On a side note, I've personally been playing a lot of Lorena, and I've been really enjoying Hodojo a lot, because of the cool confirms you can get there with up air ladders, but maybe I'm also delusional, since not too many of the Lorena players marked it as being notably great, just that it's kinda good. As far as counterpicks go, Lorena loves going to Rockwall, but Hyperborean Harbor is nice as well. Both of these stages allow Lorena to push opponents deep off the map, or into small side blast zones, or the small high ceiling. And the high platform layouts on these stages allow Lorena to access deadlier places to pull opponents to with up airs and up specials. As far as stages that Lorena could go without, any larger stage like Fire Capital and Merchant Port aren't really for her to go to. However, due to Cher being able to cover and hold space in a really unique way on these larger stages, a lot of them don't feel explicitly awful in some matchups, just not necessarily really where she wants to go in every matchup. So I'm having a hard time deciding to mark them as bad or just okay, since they're not always bad, but they definitely can be. Next, let's go ahead and yap about Galvan. I didn't have too many Galvan players respond to the survey, so I reached out to Viviana, who's won a few of the last Up Weekly events, for her take on the Dino stages. Overall, Galvan's game plan is pretty flexible, since his normals are all really big and can cover platforms, but his grounded options aren't necessarily lacking either, and do a really good job popping opponents up into combos. His high kill power is high enough that while smaller blast zones do benefit him, he doesn't have to rely on them in the same way that other fighters do to cheese a stock early, making him pretty versatile with more neutral stages, with two standouts being Etherean Forest and Julesville. However, stages like Fire Capital, Harbor, and Tempest can be a bit hard for him to navigate with his slower speeds, allowing for opponents to easily take extra space in the matchup, denying Galvan his extra awesome fun time when he does get galvanized. For counterpicks, Rockwall is also incredible for Galvan, since while the stage is a little longer, his moves cover the platform super well and threaten kills incredibly early off stage, with his heavy weight normally preventing him from getting killed super early back. Olympia's jimming her way into the video, or whatever she does. I don't really know how to transition between these characters anymore, like, if you drink every time I say up next is, we're all blackout, you know? Her stages are pretty similar to the other Brawly characters, but since she normally doesn't kill off the top, stages with low ceilings don't really appeal or benefit her super well. However, since she has 1,000,000,001 options to kill off the side, starters like Julesville and Etherean Forest are incredible. However, if your opponent bans those, don't worry, Hodojo's platform layout gives her tons of combo extenders, and it doesn't have super small blast zones, meaning that the game is never made too hard for her there either. As far as counterpicks go, Merchant Port isn't bad, and Rockwall definitely has visible benefits with the smaller side blast zones. But overall, she would prefer sticking to the smaller starter stages. On that note, due to her burst movement nerfs recently, big stages can feel really bad for her right now, since she's not able to really close the gaps quite as fast anymore. So taking her somewhere like Fire Capital or Hyperborean Harbor is always sure to leave her playing on the back foot. Speaking of feet, let's talk about Maple. I told you these transitions are getting kinda rocky. Maple's also brawly, but she has a lot of tools that allow her to play kinda like a hit and run style like that Simpsons game. Her strong juggle game and tether combos mean that stages with low ceilings like Godai Delta, or a stage with lots of platforms for her to land and reset her juggles on like Hodojo are notably strong for her. Merchant Port also kinda combines these ideas, while also giving her access to a longer stage, allowing her to force opponents to come to her, interact with Lily, and then still get juggled with a high top platform assist. Of course, her killing horizontally isn't bad either, with Tether Nair or Double Dunks easily taking stocks. These are great on stages like Rockwall, especially when you consider how strong Downstrong becomes at ledge, on a stage with those kinda like super small blast zones. If you're having trouble against Maple in a set, I'd kinda stop to think to consider if you're dying off the top due to her juggles, or getting camped, since you'll need to ban stages with either low ceilings or long stages, which can be matchup dependent into the little rat. Finally, in our rock category, we have Crag. Crag's pretty slow, but he has a few tools that help him take advantage of having lots of space, and big aerials and normals in general that can easily cover platforms or tech chases, meaning that there's not like a lot of stages that are explicitly bad for him across the board, just stages that are bad depending on your matchup. Small stages like Forest and Godai are great when fighting opponents who want to take up lots of space and keep you out, while larger stages are great for taking time to pull rock and set up confirms on a down B and making fighters engage with you instead. His best starter was voted to be Julesville, thanks to the platform allowing Crag to rock pull while standing under it, and its consistent, smaller size while having room for Crag to back up if needed. His best counterpick is Rockwall, with tons of players voting for it. His strong horizontal kill options make it an easy pick for the Dung Beetle. However, stages like Harbor and Tempest Peak are also great options in matchups where your opponent is killing you early off the side, or able to threaten you super hard when you need a playoff stage on Pillar while recovering. Crag's Rock being so versatile at killing as well definitely allows him to pick stages that might not necessarily benefit him, but might hurt his opponent worse, making it really hard to say if he has a real bad stage like some other fighters. For example, I mentioned Ethereal Forest being good, but you probably don't want to go there in every matchup. In fact, it's kind of bad in some matchups, and because of this, I'm not sure if I'm going to mark any stages as being explicitly bad for Crag, but just know that if your main can outdo him on a certain stage, it's probably bad in that matchup in particular for him. Hopping into our water fighters, let's go ahead and start with Rano. Rano has great scrapping tools, big tilts, and hard-hitting aerials, as well as moves like needles that allow him to slow down the tempo of the game and force opponents to come to him. His fast ground speed but slow air speed means that long stages normally benefit him more than stages where he needs to go far to push an offstage ledge guard, meaning that stages like Ethereal Forest and Tempest Peak aren't his favorites to pick. However, as far as starters go, Rano loves taking advantage of platform tech chases on Hodojo, while also benefiting from playing and charging needles underneath the platform. Merchant Port and Fire Capital are also great for him, since his high jumps can help cover those high up top plats while also getting to take advantage of their longer lengths, and his intrinsic ability to force approaches. Rano is also another character similar to Crag, however, where he can kinda choose to brawl or camp you, so I would definitely choose your stages based on how your opponent is playing if you are fighting a Rano, and if you're a Rano player, be sure to switch between both playstyles depending on the situation and what the stage calls for. My bestie Orcane is up next. Orcane's fast grounded movement and incredible burst range means that any smaller stage is going to be sick for him. He's got great kill power off the top with confirms like down tilt or puddle into up strong, and the ability to go deep off stage or kill off the side with moves like Nair, back air, forward tilt, and of course, bubble butt, meaning that Orcane has the freedom to pick and ban stages based on what the opponent wants or what their weaknesses are. Overall though, stages like Godai, Julesville, and Metal Refinery all work great for the Whale, since they allow him to take and hold space with Puddle, while still threatening kills at more or less any angle. For counterpicks, Rockwall and Fire Capital both work great depending on what you need, whether you want to take more room and play passive with the Puddle supporting you, defensively, or try to burst down opponents quickly off stage and steal a stock. Truthfully, Orcane doesn't really have any awful stages. I mean, Ethereal Forest and Tempest Peak can be awkward to play into characters that are really good at closing the gap or killing Orcane off stage, and longer stages can be a little tricky into fighters that wall you, but since this kit is so flexible, being able to seamlessly swap between passive and offensive positioning with this huge wave dash, none of these feel really quite as awful as a bad stage might feel for other fighters. I just thought I should make sure to mention it. Sliding over to Edelist, this big dude has a pretty strict stage list due to his movement, disadvantage, and combo game being so dependent on plat layout and the general stage itself. His ability to both steal stocks off stage and consistently recover is also super important to consider when you're picking him. As far as starters go, the bear loves Godai and Julesville, being able to kill early off the top or side, as well as being able to get simple platform follow-ups without being too scared of being comboed too hard on them either. For counterpicks, Merchant Port is incredible for him, since he's able to quickly close gaps on ice, but the stage's length means that he has some time to step back and set up ice all at the same time, without it being too long for him to be unable to close gaps at all. Unfortunately, Edelist can struggle on stages like Tempest Peak, Fire Capital, and Hyperborean Harbor, due to them either being a little awkward to place ice on for their big lengths, or in matchups where Edelist would prefer just to be a little bit closer to his opponent, since the primary counterplay to Edelist once ice is down is just to step back and kind of wall him out and wait for it to go away. I will mention though that Hyperborean Harbor can be kind of nice for Edelist in some matchups, especially if it's a matchup where you can intercept opponents' recoveries really easily and then prevent them from getting to the wall. However, it's not the most consistent stage for him and can definitely be pretty bad for him too. For our last fighter, we have our newest addition to the roster, Slade. Since Slade is so new, I imagine his stage picks will warp over time as his meta develops, but responders to the poll noted that longer stages like Harbor and Merchant Port felt better for him as long as the opponent didn't have some kind of tool to keep him out. But since moves like Up Special and Forward Air kill so early up the side, maps with small blast zones like Rockwall or Ethereal Forest felt really good too. I think a big part of playing as or against Slade over the next few months will be figuring out how your main wants to approach him. For example, if you're a Zetterburn player, you probably want to opt to take him to a smaller stage like Forest, But if you're a zoner player like Absa, or prefer to play more passive in general, taking him to a stage like Fire Capital might benefit you just a touch more, since his slower run speed can allow you to wall him out easier than he can wall you out in some of those scenarios. Overall, responders marked that Slade doesn't love Hodojo since the extra platform isn't really something that he takes advantage of too often, and that Metal Refinery can be a little tricky as well, since the moving platforms change the dynamic of how much space you're allowed to safely take. As I mentioned though, Slade is still super new, and obviously so is Metal Refinery, so I imagine that out of all the fighters, his details are more likely to change over time. Maybe Slade finds out he loves Metal Refinery, I'm not really sure. That's all the characters in the Rivals cast though. Thank you so much to everyone in the community who participated and gave me feedback about your mains. And let me know if you agree with the community's takes, or if other stages you prefer or just kinda hate for your fighter. Don't forget to let me know what you think of the current meta in the poll in the description down below, and thanks as always for watching until the end. Until next time though, bye for now.